Hello and welcome to worksheet P22. In this case, what we're doing is we're trying to solve quadratic functions. We're trying to find the x values that will make the equations work. And so what we're looking at is being able to factor. We're going to look at solving these guys by factoring. If you recall, our factoring method when we have a quadratic is what I like to refer to as the ACB method, where we take the a value, our 1, and our c value, the 10, and multiply them. We get a 10. We take the b value, which is -7, and we say, hey, what two numbers multiply to equal 10? Same two numbers add to equal -7, and we'll deal with the negative sign first, so add to equal 7. So let's talk about multiplying to 10. Well, got a couple options. We have 1 and 10 or 5 and 2. Well, 5 and 2 are going to be the two that make the 10. But to make a -7 using the 5 and the 2, they're both going to have to be negative. So -2 times, or -5 times -2 is also a positive 10. -5 plus a -2 is equal to a -7. So -5 and -2 are the two numbers. So we're going to split the -7 into -5x and -2x. Keeping our x squared in the front, keeping our plus 10 after it, and we're still equal 0. We'll come back and talk about the equal 0 part in a moment. If we group, we say, hey, what do these guys have in common? They have an x in common. So we have an x and a -5 left over after we take that x out, which means, if you recall, this group is also going to have an x -5. And what do I have to take out of a -2 to get to x? And that, of course, would be a -2. Still equals 0. We now have two groups. We have x -2 and x -5. And we're still equal 0. So we've now got it factored. Our job is to figure out, what do I need to do? Got two things multiplied together to equal 0. So we're going to take a moment to talk about what happens when you have two things multiplied together to equal 0. So as a side note here, we're looking at trying to fill in these two blanks. What two numbers multiply to equal 0? Well, pretty simply, if this number is 0, I can put any number I want right here, right? And we're going to get an answer of 0. But likewise, if I make this number 0, I can put any number I want in this slot. So the fact is, we don't know which of the two blanks is going to be 0, but one of them has to be a 0. And coming back to our problem, that's what we're looking at. We have two blanks here. We have two things multiplied together equals 0. We know one of the two is equal to 0. We don't know which one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually get two answers to this question. We have to say, what would make x -2 0? And some of you guys will be able to figure that out very easily. If you aren't able to figure it out easily, you can always work it out like this. You can always say, hey, what? X -2, how about I get that equals 0? Just do a quick little algebra problem. Add 2 to both sides, we get x equals 2. Some of you guys could look at it and say, well, 2 minus 2 is equal to 0. And so one of our answers is x equals 2. And if we do the same thing we just did with the x -2 and do it to the x -5, x -5 is equal to 0. Well, some of you guys could look at that and say, well, 5 minus 5 is equal to 0. But if you wanted to do the algebra, if you're not quite sure, you can always do the algebra to get there. And so the fact is that x could either be a +2 or a +5 to make this work. We have to give both answers, and the word or is extremely important because you can't be both 2 and 5, right? Can't be both 13 and 14 years old at the same time. You're either 13 or you're 14. You're not both. And you can't be a 2 or you can't be a 5 at the same time. You can either be one or the other. So that's our process that we're looking at. We're going to factor. So taking a look at number 3, we're going to factor. We got ACB method. AC is -10, the B value -3. The two numbers that are going to multiply to -10. Don't worry about the negative sign. I'm going to try 5 and 2 again. how do I get to -3 with 5 and 2? Well, it's going to have to be a -5 plus 2. And -5 times 2 is the -10. So we're going to break this guy up into -5b plus 2b. Right? So we got b squared minus 5b plus 2b minus 10 equals 0. We group these guys, plus in between. And we're going to factor out a b minus 5. We know this is going to be a b minus 5. 2, got to take out the 2, right? 2b to go to b, I got to take out the 2. Still equals 0. Grouping these guys, I got b plus 2 in one group. I got b minus 5 in the second group. And so now we got to figure out the two things that are going to multiply together to equal 0. Well, 0 or 0. We don't know which one. So if you recall in the last problem, we said, well, when we get to that point, we need to figure out how do we get to 0. Well, if b plus 5 is equal to 0, I got a minus 2 to both sides. B is equal to -2. Some of you might have known, hey, -2 plus 2 is equal to 0. So you can go straight to the answer in that case. And right up above, we had a problem very similar. What minus 5 equals 0? That, of course, is going to be a 5. Okay, we ran into that up here. What minus 5 is equal to 0? Same thing. You don't have to write this out if you can do it in your head. If you need to write it out, write it out. Okay? Number 5, ACB method. AC is 6, B is 5. Multiply to equal 6. How about 3 times 2? Add to equal 5. How about 3 plus 2? I think that works, right? So we have a plus 3r and a plus 2r. Group. Technically, supposed to group this with the plus sign included and a plus sign in between the groups. Take out the r, I'm left with r plus 3. To get to r plus 3 here, to go from 2r to r, I'm taking out the 2. So r plus 2, r plus 3. Remember, these guys are always equal to 0 in this case. And what plus 2 is going to equal 0? Well, b plus 2, we needed a -2. R would be the same thing, right? Or, and hopefully you figured this out by now, hey, it's just going to be the opposite of whatever this number is, presuming this is just a single variable. And so we end up with -3 in this case. All right, ACB method. We've got to be very careful here because we're missing a term, if you'll notice. We have our a value, right? So 1. We have a number in front of the b, which there's our a. Confusing, I understand, when you're dealing with the same variable that we're talking about, a, b, and c. So the number in front of the b is our b value over here, right? So that's 7, which means we're missing the c value. That means the c value is 0, which means what's 1 times 0? Well, of course, that's 0. So how do I multiply to equal 0 and add to equal 7? Well, multiplying to equal 0, one of them's got to be a 0. So 0 times 7 and 0 plus 7, right? So we break this guy up into 0b plus 7b. Still got our plus 0. Still got our b squared. All right, factor out here. Still equals 0. We get b. We got a b plus 0. To get a b plus 0 here, we got to take out a 7 out of the 7b, right? So we got b plus 7 and b plus 0 equals 0. Now I'm going to show you a little easier way to do this problem because, but if you want to use the same method that we've been using, you can do that. But whenever there's a missing term, there's sometimes a little bit of a shortcut, and I'll show you in a moment. But let's get our answer here. What is the b value going to be? b plus 7 is equal, to make that a 0, that's going to have to be a -7. What plus 0 equals 0? Well, of course, that's 0. Okay. Now we had another option back up here with the b squared plus 7b. I'm going to flip over my worksheet so I have some room to work. but I had b squared plus 7b equals 0. What I could have done is, since I don't have a c term, is I can just say, hey, what can I factor out of these two guys? I could just factor out a b plus 7, right? Which means I have two things multiplied together to equal 0. Now this one looks a little different because this group, if you will, is not a group anymore. It's just a single variable. That's one of the blanks. What's going to make that 0? Well, of course, b would be 0 to make that 0. To make this one 0, b would be -7. We get the same answer. B is equal to 0 or -7. On the other side, we said, b is equal to -7 or 0. Same answer, right? Doesn't matter which one you pick. All right. Finally, on question number 9, I just threw a little wrench at you here. One of the things I want you to notice about this problem is that we could technically take a 3 out of this whole thing. So we got a couple different ways to do this, because using our regular method would be a little bit more difficult than if I were to do this. If I were to factor out a 3, take out a 3 to start with, I have n squared plus 6n plus 8. This is a way easier problem to factor than this. If you think about it, if I left this original, my ACB method would say 3 times 24, that's 72 and 18. I got to find two numbers that multiply to 72 and add to 18. That's kind of difficult, all right? I can do it. It's possible. But is it easier to find two numbers that multiply to 1 times 8, AC is equal to 8, the b value of 6? Which one's going to be easier? Well, of course, finding the two things that multiply to 8 and add to 6 is going to be easier. Of course, that's going to be 4 and 2. Right? And so when we break this guy up to 4n and 2n, group them, plus sign in, right? Remember, the 3 is multiplied by this whole thing, and technically need to put it all in braces because these guys are being added. It's like 3 is being distributed through the group. The process here is that this 3 ends up not really mattering, because when I take out an n, I got an n plus 4, right? N plus 4. Take out my 2. And now I have a 3. In this group, I have an n plus 2 and an n plus 4. So now I got 3 things multiplied together to equal 0. Well, you know what? One of those 3 things has to be 0. Can 3 ever be a 0? Absolutely not. So we don't even have to worry about that guy. The only way we're going to get an answer here is if n would be -2 or n would be equal to -4. Now, we would have gotten the exact same answer had we used our ACB method of 72 and 18. We'd just taken a little while to find those two numbers. We'd have got the exact same answer. So you have to make a decision on what method you want to do. If you see that you can take a number out of the original problem, that might make it a little bit easier. Good luck on the even problems. Send me the results when you get done.